Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Building Safer Spaces, Harm Reduction in Action, a three-part webinar series as part of a unique partnership offering continuing education opportunities to train social workers in the practice of harm reduction. Thank you all for being here. My name is Jen Tracy, and I'm the Chief Program Officer at the RIZE Massachusetts Foundation, and also a fellow social worker. RIZE is proud to be part of this groundbreaking partnership with the National Harm Reduction Coalition and the National Association of Social Workers, Massachusetts chapter, to expand knowledge and create space for dialogue about harm reduction and social work to advance practice and deepen relationships with clients. We are so pleased to welcome you to the second webinar in a three-part series focused on topics such as trauma, addiction, supporting survivors of sexual violence in the practice of harm reduction. This series builds on our past webinars on themes such as cultural humility, stigma, and supporting families impacted by substance use disorder. As some of you may be joining us for the first time today, I'm happy to share some brief background about RIZE. RIZE was launched in 2017. It's a public-private partnership solely dedicated to funding and collaborating on solutions to end the overdose crisis. Guided by those with lived and living experience and unafraid of new ideas, RIZE is building networks, creating programming, and investing in community partners who are using novel approaches to preventing overdose and increasing access to treatment and recovery supports. Strategic workforce investments like this ensure that professionals in the care continuum, like social workers, have the critical tools you need to directly support your clients experiencing opioid use disorder. Harm reduction offers a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at meeting people where they are to reduce the negative consequences associated with drug use. Social workers are uniquely positioned to integrate those practices to improve client well-being. We are so honored to be partnering with the National Harm Reduction Coalition and the National Association of Social Workers, Mass chapter, to bring this webinar series to you. So before we get started, we want to share just a few housekeeping items. This webinar will run from 12 to 1:30 p.m. and is worth 1.5 continuing education units. These CEUs are also approved for attendees from Rhode Island. Please remain on mute throughout the webinar, but please feel free to add your questions and comments in the chat. And we'll also do our best to reserve the last 10 to 15 minutes for question and answering session. As Chris Belli said at the intro, please make sure your full name is displayed on your Zoom. This presentation will also include verbal descriptions of images in slides to accommodate attendees with visual impairments. Slides will be shared after the webinar to those that complete the evaluation form. And please note that this webinar is recorded and will later be posted on the NASW Social Work Online CE Institute. If you're attending this program live, you must stay on for the full event to receive full credit. The recordings will also be posted on the RIZE YouTube channel for non-credit viewing at any time. There will be a code given at the end of the webinar. All participants must enter this code in the course evaluation form to receive credit. You can find the link to the form in the email reminder that was sent with the Zoom information. Thank you all in advance for taking the time to share your feedback. It is very important to us, and we use it continuously in this webinar series. So for this series, we'll once again be led by Tanagra Melgarejo Pulido from the National Harm Reduction Coalition and Joe Pereira of Outlook Associates of New England. And with that, I'm pleased to turn it over to Joe and Tanagra to get us started. Thank you.
Great. So maybe I can start just to quickly introduce myself. So my name is Joe Pereira. I am in private practice in Arlington, with a couple of specialties. One of them is on anger management, and the other is working with chemical addictions. I just wanted to quickly, before having Tanagra introduce herself, so this is an introduction. So really keeping that in mind, that it's a lot to cover. Each of these drugs could probably have their own seminar in terms of the information that we're providing. And we're also not sort of including other certain medications or drugs like ADD medication, nicotine, caffeine. So there are resources at the end of the slides where you can get more information. Obviously, this information is hopefully going to be used for you to better understand your clients, but also to help, because many of you, certainly I have, worked with family members of people struggling perhaps with their substance use. And so helping family members understand these different drugs. And then the third thing I would just say is that for those of you who have attended these trainings in the past, you will be seeing some information that's been repeated. But I think myself and Tanagra believe it's very important that this information, some of these principles and concepts get reiterated.
So, buenas tardes, good afternoon. I'm Tanagra Melgarejo Pulido. I am part of the National Harm Reduction Coalition. I'm a social worker. I've been with NHRC for 8 years, and I've been a harm reductionist for more than 30. I can't believe I'm saying that. It's a day-to-day practice. And I love this spaces because I get to learn so much from everyone in this space and to build community with each other, which now more than ever is so important. So I'm thrilled to be sharing this space with all of you and with Joe today. And with that, I am gonna pass it to Joe again.
Okay, so just a very quick overview of what we'll be covering in this hour and a half, now a little less than an hour and a half. So we're going to be doing talking about some contextualizing of the drug use, and then focusing on a couple of categories of drugs, and then at the end, sort of sharing some resources. And through this all, at various points, we will be asking you as participants certain questions that you can answer in the chat room.
And so for those of you that are not familiar with National Harm Reduction Coalition, we have been around for 30 years, and we have had the honor and the privilege of creating spaces for dialogue and action that can help heal the harms that are caused by racialized drug policies. We've also had the honor and the pleasure of training hundreds of thousands of human beings on topics that are part of the harm reduction spectrum across the United States, Canada, Europe. We've had the opportunity to connect with people from all over the globe, to be able to support them in building, establishing, or expanding harm reduction services. We have a lovely website. Please visit it. We have an area for resources and publications. Check them out. The only thing we ask is if you're going to download and use them, if you're adapting them, that you just give us credit, but otherwise they're there for you. And another thing that we wanted to like to share with you as we start this session is to remember and remind ourselves of the importance of language, right? Language is powerful. Language helps us connect with each other, to each other. It gives us the opportunity to collaborate with folks, to humanize folks that have been stigmatized and shamed and pushed aside and pushed away. And we always encourage each other in these spaces to work from a person-centered, person-first language. Many times words have been used to really harm people, particularly people who use drugs. And so in this context, we want to center the person first. Their behaviors are not who they are. Their behaviors are things that they do and engage in, but they're much more than their behaviors. And it's a reminder that we're working with people, and people are beautiful and messy and complicated. And because we're working with people, we can really control the outcome. We can only be in community and in principle struggle with them as they're exploring their substance use. And so if we move through the session, that reminder of using person first language is really key, particularly when we're talking about topics such as substance use, right? That we know tend to be things people shy away because of the profound shame and stigma that they carry.
So again, for those of you who have attended prior trainings, the next couple of questions are going to look familiar. But what I'd like you to do is, and again, put your answers in the chat. As you think about the clients that you're working with and the certain drugs that they use, why do you think that they are using those certain drugs? So we want to kind of focus it a little bit. So not only why do people use drugs, but why do people use the drugs that they have chosen? What is it about the drug from your perspective that are making them use it as an option? And so again, if you could, self-medication availability. Oh, wow, lots of
Fast.
yes, yes, yes. Okay. Sorry, I'm going down here. Availability, yes, we'll touch upon that. Genetics, medicating pain, feeling loneliness or another whole, get a sensation, shutting out the world. The drug of choice provides relief from whatever discomfort they are experiencing. Coping, self-medication, regulation, familiar, lack of other coping skills, accessibility, yes, and costs. Good point there. Pain and mental health system management. And again, there are going to be certain drugs that have are kind of associated with dealing with pain or mental health systems. It feels good. It's accessible. Self-medication, coping, to not feel. Yep. Easy to access for pain, escape, self-medication because they're fun. Yes. Numb, self, energy, anxiety, sleep, cost and access. Yes. Socialization, looking for God. Yeah. Coping and limited resources, easy to get. It's legal. Yes. Also important to keep in mind. Okay. So then again, in the context of thinking about people who are using certain drugs that you're working with, why don't people stop using drugs? They work, yes. Can't stop. Habit, lack of support, dependency, scared. Habit, feels bad. The brain's response, yes. Makes them feel good. Habit, yes. So that's coming up. Physiological, yep. Lack of resources, withdrawal, which we'll touch upon. Physical dependency. Withdrawal hurts, yes. No supports, no housing, no healing options. So fear of change, lack of other skills, concerned with stigma of being sober or needing to be sober, access to treatment or lack of access. Being sober is scary, isolation, limited coping tools. Yes, really good. All right. Drugs integrate into people's thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, nostalgia. Yeah. So again, as we think about this, people will have different reasons for using drugs and not stopping their use. And so by considering these factors, it's going to be useful for us when working with the individual to brainstorm options to reduce risk for disease or fatal overdoses or fatal episodes.
And so why have Joe and I named this training Safer Drug Use instead of Safe Drug Use, right? And the idea here is that you can have everything be safe. We can help people be safer by giving them options that they can explore. We have a factor here. We're working with human beings and we're working with accessibility to resources, right? And so how people put into play those resources will make them safer or less safe. And so there's nothing really 100%, 1,000% safe in any behavior that we engage in. And so safer drug use feels more attainable and more realistic, and hence why we've called this training that. And so if we think of safer use, it is always good for us to come back to harm reduction as a tool, as a framework, as a practice that can help us begin those conversations with human beings about what that means to them. Because what safer use means to Tanagra may look different for what it looks to Joe, and that is fine, because we're working with me here individually and with Joe individually, right? So we get to define what that looks like for us. And the harm reduction approach gives us the opportunity to explore a multiplicity of strategies, right? That people can decide to practice to address any negative consequences that may be associated with their use, whether it's drug use or behavior such as sex work or any other behavior that may be potentially harmful to them. And so you have safer techniques, that's access to new sterile equipment, access to naloxone, access to drug checking, and having the ability to bring your substances to be tested so that you know what it is in the substance, which some programs across the United States are able to do. And which has made a difference for people in terms of having that understanding. Then we have managed use, which is how do we support people that are using multiple substances to be able to either stop doing that, or if they're going to engage in that practice, to do it in a way that is safer for them. Managed use may mean changing route of administration. It may be using less. It may be using at different times of the day. And we're going to look at that in a second through the modes of administration. And then finally, abstinence. Abstinence is part of the harm reduction continuum. Again, what we always offer to folks is give people the opportunity to define abstinence as abstinence looks to them. What does abstinence mean to you in this process? How do you define it? It may look different for me than for Joe. Again, it is okay. You're meeting people where they're at and you're working with their definition. And harm reduction believes in abstinence and has supported many people get to abstinence. So abstinence is part of the harm reduction continuum, right? We see it as a path that people will walk if they choose to walk it, not because we're imposing it on them. And harm reduction is also a movement that started, out of the need of people who use drugs to take care of each other and to take care of their communities, right? And we believe that you don't have public health if you don't have social justice. That the only way that you will end inequality and oppression is if you foster a framework of health and liberation that looks at and questions and challenges racism, stigma, and criminalization, because many a time those are the real causes of harm for people, much more harmful than actually substance use itself. And that in order for us to have transformative change from the root, change where people will be free and liberated, right? The only way that we can do that is if we follow, we trust, we believe in, we center, we uplift the leadership of those that are most impacted, because they are the ones that are the key to any transformative change.
So two other, and again, these are two other concepts and principles that we've discussed in previous seminars, but again, really important to remind ourselves is the first one is a personal autonomy. So the person's individual capacity for self-determination or self-governance. And really to keep in mind that people are making the best choices they can with the tools and resources that they have. And so a number of you in the chat, as we talked about why people use drugs or stop using drugs, it could be a lack of resources. And so that is what they're struggling with. And so we have to kind of appreciate these are some of the things that they're up against. And then this notion of radical neutrality and acceptance. And I think it's really important for us to be as social workers, mental health people, to really reflect on this as we're working with individuals. And it may be challenging for us. And sometimes taking that neutral or accepting stance is really hard. And it also could be depending on the person's the drug that they're using or one's experience with that drug in their own life or with their families. A number of years ago, I had a colleague and friend who basically her husband had a severe alcohol problem and caused a lot of turmoil in her life. And she was very clear, and, in some part, good for her. She could not work with people with addictions because the countertransference feelings were just too much. And so I think she was honest enough with herself that she couldn't take that radical, neutral, accepting stance to working with people who might struggle with addiction. And then the other thing here, as we think about and as we talk about these different drugs that people are using, to think about the continuum of drug use for a couple of reasons. One of them is, first of all, that people are going to be using likely multiple drugs. And so what may be habitual and daily for one drug, they could be social with another drug. And so we have to really kind of consider those different dimensions. And then also, a number of people talked about setting. And sort of the experimental or situational use, for instance. A lot of times, and again, we're not going to talk about these specific type of medications, but people using ADD medication that hasn't prescribed to them in college to kind of keep them alert and being able to stay up and do last minute assignments and that sort of thing. And then once they're out of college, they stop using it. So again, we want to consider those types of situations as well.
One thing that is also important for us as we move through this session and we're thinking about safer use is also understanding that recovery is different for different folks, right? And what I love about, SAMHSA's guide is that it gives us a set of principles in terms of us working with people as they're moving through their substance use and identifying what is their road to recovery, what is the path that they're going to take, right? And if you look at these 10 principles, I think about them and I see them, and they're, to me, harm reduction, right? Hope, person driven. I get to define that. There's many pathways, as Joe was saying. It is holistic. It's looking at the whole person. It engages in peer supports. It is relational, right? Again, going to the beginning around language, like human beings, we have a drive, a need. It's helped us survive and get to today, to connect and rely on each other, right? There's also issues of culture that are part of recovery, not only my own identity as a person that belongs to a culture in terms of ethnic culture, but also other cultures, right? The culture of the community of people who use drugs where I live, right? Thinking about those things, how do we address and recognize and work from a trauma-informed, person-centered, engaged framework? We always look to uplift the strengths of people and responsibility. There's a sense of accountability and boundaries here too. That is also really important. Boundaries makes us happy. Boundaries keep us safe. Boundaries helps me relate to you and know how you want me to relate to you, and also how I want you to relate to me, and respect, which is also connected to that. And so we think of redefining recovery, right? Thinking about these principles and how harm reduction is part of the recovery spectrum, and that recovery will look different to people and how they understand their substance use and how they move towards this process will be different because, again, it's person driven. And we have to be open and willing to work with people where they're at around this process. So what is a drug? How would you define drugs? So if folks want to type in the chat as we're moving through this section, what do you understand a drug to be? That would be fantastic. What are drugs? It's a chemical substance. It's a mind-altering substance. Absolutely. Yes, I see that. Thank you. Let me see. It's going fast. Anything that changes the body chemistry, mood-altering substance, any substance that alters the mind, something that alters your brain chemistry, mood altering, absolutely, mind body altering. It changes our personality. It can develop dependence. It helps with pain. Something that alters your mind and body. Absolutely, there's great stuff coming through. So we are going to see a quick video now that speaks to that. And I would love for folks, if you have any feedback about the video, to share with us in the chat, okay? Let me know if, oh, hold on, I need to do something here first. Because if I don't share my sound, right, then you can't hear it. Okay.
Meet Jeannie. Jeannie is a bright young girl in her first year of university. Tonight, Jeannie is attending a social hosted at the local pub for students in her program. While she is excited to drink for the first time, she is a little wary. Are there long-term effects from binge drinking? What is the likelihood of developing an addiction? What exactly is an addiction? To understand why people drink and take drugs, we must first journey back to a time when staying alive was a challenge. Unbeknownst to our prehistoric cousins, their everyday survival depended on the actions of a brain system scientists now call the mesocorticolimbic dopamine reward pathway. Found deep within the center of the brain, this pathway is activated when we encounter new stimuli that are important for our survival. The end result is a feeling of enhanced well-being. For our ancient ancestors, this meant that venturing out into dangerous territory to find a source of food or a sexual mate would lead to a release of dopamine, making our caveman here feel very, very good. The experience of the rewarding stimulus would be encoded into regions of the brain involved in memory and planning, ensuring that our ancestors would continue to actively feed and procreate, despite the many lurking perils of the time. Drugs of abuse, like alcohol, cocaine, or marijuana, work by exploiting the same pathway that has helped humans to learn and survive for generations. All addictive drugs, either directly or indirectly, modulate dopamine signaling in this pathway. Importantly, not everyone who uses these drugs becomes addicted. However, for some individuals, a first-time experience can turn into a lifelong addiction. When an individual tries a drug for the first time, he or she initially experiences a sense of euphoria, unlike that of any natural reward, such as food or sex. Often, the feeling of intoxication drives a user to take more of the drug. This behavior is representative of the first stage of addiction, binge and intoxication. During the first stage, the drug targets a region of the midbrain known as the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, and causes the release of dopamine into a tiny structure known as the nucleus accumbens. Endorphins, our body's primary natural opioid, is also released. It is believed that the combined activation of both dopamine and endorphins is what underlies the sensation of pleasure following drug use. Other brain regions are also activated in the initial phases of drug use. The globus pallidus, part of the basal ganglia, is associated with the formation of habits and automatic behaviors. During this stage, drugs of abuse prompt the globus pallidus to encode drug-related behaviors as habits. The prefrontal cortex, or PFC, is a region responsible for executive functions like planning and decision-making. Normally, the PFC inhibits lower brain regions such as the nucleus accumbens. However, drugs of abuse weaken this control, thus disinhibiting the nucleus accumbens. This is thought to underlie the impulsivity that is characteristic of the binge and intoxication stage. A different subset of neural structures is implicated in the second stage of the addiction cycle, the withdrawal and negative affect stage. Because drug use increases dopamine levels beyond what is normal, chronic use leads to a number of compensatory responses. The net result is that when the user is not high, the dopamine signal is actually lower than normal, leaving the user feeling awful and unhappy. The neural systems underlying this negative affective state includes a group of midbrain structures known as the extended amygdala. The activation of these systems leads to the production of stress hormones. Eventually, consuming the drug no longer produces pleasure, but instead is now used in an effort to stave off highly unpleasant psychological and physiological symptoms of withdrawal. Drug use has become a deep, compulsive need, rather than a pleasurable, impulsive desire. The final stage of the addiction cycle is the anticipation and craving stage, which often marks the point whereby an individual's chronic drug use may lead to the development of a substance use disorder. While this phase is commonly represented as craving, it is important to note that craving does not by itself lead to the relapse that begins another cycle. This final stage is characterized by a complete loss of prefrontal control, as continued drug use compromises frontal lobe structures critical for evaluation, judgment, and decision-making. This stage is also characterized by altered glutamatergic signaling. Glutamate plays a critical role in memory formation and consolidation, as well as behavioral initiation. During the anticipation and craving stage, the large waves of dopamine received by the prefrontal cortex during drug use prompt the reciprocal release of glutamate in the midbrain, committing the drug and the experience to memory. As the plasticity of the brain is continuously shaped and reshaped by the drug, new paths become cemented as drug-related contextual information is stored by the hippocampus, and activation of the basolateral amygdala leads to conditioned responses to highly specific drug-related cues. In this way, chronic substance use can be thought of as a maladaptive form of learning, whereby the drug has capitalized on the plastic nature of the brain. Extended drug use leads to the exploitation and rearrangement of neural circuitry, instilling memories, habits, and goals that place greater importance on drug use than on natural rewards. And what about Jeannie? It's difficult to say whether addiction is a foregone conclusion for her. However, now that she has the knowledge, she feels emboldened to make safer decisions about her own drug use.
For me, some of the things that are really key in this video are that substance use is a unique experience for each individual that uses, that not everyone that uses drugs will end up developing a dependency or an addiction, and that it's really, really important then to approach this from a person-centered space, right? To really understand what may be the things that are driving someone's substance use, and if someone has been using substances for a period of time, we know that there are changes in the brain chemistry. How do we support that person, right, to transition from use, understanding that they may need also other supports to ensure that what the substances were doing in the brain for them, you know, and no longer will be doing if they're not using, that we can compensate through other supports. And so when we think of what a drug is, right, it's any substance that in small amounts produces significant changes in mind, body, or both. I have my coffee here. Makes me really happy. It makes me alert. It puts me in a good mood, right? For some of us, it's chocolate. It can be cheese. right? And we're thinking of just things that are there, everyday things that we eat, right? Or that we consume. So if they make us feel better, if they make changes in our mind, body, or both, then it is a drug. There's some drugs that are legal and some drugs that are not legal. And we also know that a drug, once it's ingested, has to be able to pass from our body into our brain. And that drugs will engage with and tap, as we saw in the video, different communication systems amongst the cells, and they will interfere with how we send, receive, or interpret messages, right? That is also really key, that we saw that it does impact, right, our ability to send, receive, interpret messages, etc. And I think that this is where I pass it to Joe, who's going to walk us through the next section.
Right. Thank you, Tanagra. So kind of two key concepts, and then Tanagra is going to talk a little bit about overdose, but there obviously all these terms are related. So tolerance is really how your body responds to a drug with repeated use. So think about Tanagra was sharing her coffee drinking, that maybe she needs a cup and a half now to maybe get the same effects that when she first started drinking, she could feel the effect with a lesser amount. One of the things that you want to be important here from this slide is when you stop using, your tolerance will decrease. And it only takes, for example, a 3-day break from opioids to significantly lower tolerance. And so when we think about situations that may force people to take a break from using, one of them may be, for instance, actually getting treatment, getting rehab treatment, inpatient treatment, or unfortunately being incarcerated. And, obviously people can have access to drugs while incarcerated, but it may be more difficult. And so actually their danger of overdosing is going to really be higher in the first few weeks after getting out of rehab or getting out of incarceration, because people often think, oh, I can go back to the way I was using, but they can't. And so it's going to take a lesser amount for them to sort of get high, which then can increase their risk. And then withdrawal is how your body responds to the sudden quitting or slowing of substance use. It's an extremely painful experience. And I think a number of you in the chat pointed out why people don't stop using, right? Is because they don't want to deal with the pain of withdrawal. There was a movie that came out a number of years ago, a drama movie. It was called Trainspotting. And they really sort of visually show a person undergoing withdrawal from opioids. Excruciating. And obviously it was with no use of medication to kind of help them with the withdrawal. The other thing to keep in mind is withdrawal from certain substances can kill you. I think what people don't recognize, and I think part of it is because it's legal, is alcohol. Alcohol withdrawal, obviously at high amounts, can cause death. And so it's really important to consider that when you're working with somebody who may be engaged in heavy alcohol use. And then, yeah, people use to prevent themselves from getting sick. Tanagra, I think this is you.
Oh, that's me. And so,
Yes.
okay, so then we've talked about, withdrawal, and we talked about tolerance, and now we can look at overdose, right? And overdose is when a drug will overwhelm your body's ability to cope with it, right? The body won't be able to function as it should. You can't breathe. Your heart rate is too high, particularly for folks that are using stimulants. The heart rate is too high. and leads to folks feeling a sense of overramping. We're going to talk about that in a second. And it's really important to think about the difference between someone who is in an active overdose and someone that is just being really, really high, right? Having an overdose response to someone who's just really high may be harmful to their health and make them distrustful, right? So that's why when we are seeing someone, there are certain things that we can do to support someone, also to help us understand if that person is in an active overdose, whether it's opioids or whether it's on stimulants, right? And so making sure that we are paying attention to the person and accompanying them would help us to gauge that. And this is me too, or is it you, Joe?
This is me.
Got it.
Yeah. So yeah. So again, we've shown this model before. Obviously, what we're focusing on is the drug and the effect. So again, people are going to be drawn. So it's been interesting in working with people where they will talk about using a certain drug and not liking the effects. And so guess what? They're not going to use it because it didn't give them any pleasure. Where I've had some people who talk about the first time I used a drug, it was like a love affair. And so the benefit and the pleasure that they got from using the drug was really reinforcing for them. The other thing I would say here, and that also kind of impacts on the drug, is the setting. So a number of you talked about accessibility. That's going to impact on what drug a person uses, right? So in a community, they may have accessibility to a drug that in another community, it may not be. And I think last week, somebody brought up the question of crystal meth becoming more popular here in the Northeast Boston area. And Tanagra made the point that if you go out west, it's been around a long time, crystal meth. And so people have had much more ready access to it. So there can be these shifts based on time, location, in terms of what drugs are popular, what drugs may not be so popular.
And so now we're going to look at how we break the stigma down of like what it means to use substances. Particularly if we want to work with people and support them, we need to acknowledge that substance use is a highly stigmatized behavior and that certain drugs are perceived as more dangerous based on war on drugs propaganda and who are the people who use those drugs, depending on who uses those drugs. And the best example of this is crack and cocaine. In the 80s, a ton of people on Wall Street, like if you used to see that movie, Wall Street, Greed is Good, Gordon Gekko, they were getting cocaine delivered to them in their Upper West Side offices and parties, and most of them were white cis men using cocaine, and no one batted an eye. Now, if we think about the crack cocaine epidemic, or we think of crack cocaine and what we called an epidemic, who were the people we were told were using crack cocaine, which now we have seen that was actually not true. That the great majority of people that actually use crack cocaine were white, not black, brown, or indigenous. But the system created sort of that idea. And then we penalized people that use crack cocaine, right? We thought of them as dangerous, as people that needed to be incarcerated. And we have mandatory minimums. And we've like subjected generations of people to incarceration, to poverty, to violence because of that. And you can be thrown in jail for like a really tiny amount of crack cocaine versus if you compare it to what an amount of cocaine that you can have that would actually put you in jail. So it has to do with race, it has to do with class, it has to do with how we have constructed socially and structurally what a drug is and how it's dangerous. So drugs are perceived as more dangerous if they're illegal, right? We just had an example here. If I told you today that I had to take my Ritalin so that I could focus, my ADHD medication to be able to be here, you would be like perfectly fine. It's a medication that is prescribed. If I told you that I smoked a little meth to help you do the same thing, it's illegal, you would probably be seeing me differently, right? And so one of the things that we wanted to ask, and I don't know if this is me or you, Joe, but I think this is you.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Yep, go ahead.
we can both go.
Yeah.
One of the things that Joe and I, when we're thinking of this session, wanted to ask you was, how do these stigmas that surround both who uses the substance and what substance they're using show up in your work, and how you can counteract them? If you see this when you're working with your clients or your patients, how can you counteract some of these messages that are so harmful to people?
And to maybe give people an example of this, and because I've heard it before, is some people say, oh, well, I only snort the drug, I don't use IV. And so somehow kind of making themselves better because they only snort it, they don't inject it. So there's that kind of example of a stigma sort of issue.
Absolutely, Dan. And actually, and they debunked that. The myth of the crack babies have been debunked by science and by medical science, and still is causing harm to people because it's a racialized myth too, and a gender, as a misogynist trope too as well that is there. Thank you for uplifting that. Thinking about other providers expressing stigma about patients or clients without realizing it's harmful language. Absolutely, that piece of language too, how we talk about people, addiction versus dependence, addict versus persons who uses drugs, going back to the beginning. When you point out lower motivation and missing schoolwork or school or work, etc., we're comparing use, abuse, and addictions. Absolutely. Medical doctors who are prescribed and then call patients bad actors. Yeah, I heard that. It's true. Crack versus regular cocaine stigma. I saw this so much during my work in the hospital, Alicia's sharing. And it's the same substance. Our countertransference can make us judgmental. We can listen for the purpose of understanding. Absolutely, Deborah. And I think that's when goes back to what Joe was saying earlier about also knowing us, right? And knowing what these things may bring up for us. I am the child of an alcoholic, and so that's had an impact on me and how I interact with folks whose substance of choice is alcohol, and also who have a problematic use of alcohol, right? How do I show up for them without necessarily showing up as the daughter of someone who created a lot of harm because of their use? Comments about alcohol being not that bad compared to other substances, and now we know that science is telling us that actual alcohol is kind of like not so good for us in terms of what it does to our system. Urine screens and who gets called to do urine screens, this is great. AJSM when talking to younger people looking to address pain management. Absolutely, Alexandra. How do we have conversations with youth that youth can receive us in those conversations is so important. Thank you. This is fantastic. Thank you, everyone.
Tanaga, can I
yes,
just add
yes.
two things? Well, one of them is Dan made a point about look at images depicting white moms struggling with opioid addiction while pregnant, and then look at images depicting crack babies, and sort of the dichotomy there that white mothers were struggling and we have to be sympathetic, and Black moms are evil, scary, chaotic. And thinking about, and obviously I welcome the attention given to the issue of opioid dependence and some of the strides that we've made, but thinking about when it first kind of hit the public, it was mostly white middle-class people who were affected. So I think sort of the attention and more of the sympathy that we have given is part of that has been because of that reason. And then the other quick thing is this idea. So now, cannabis marijuana is legal in many states, and you have an increase in older people using it. I suspect that there's probably some sort of link between the legalization of it and the greater use among older people.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's happening in the world? If you think of everything that's happening in the world, many folks may be using substances because it's too much to cope with, right? And so substances are really good at helping us transform our reality. And speaking of that, I want to share with you this amazing tool, and you can look it up from our friends from Drug Watch. It's the Drugs Wheel. It's beautiful because it's so colorful, and it's also beautiful because it's so comprehensive. So here you can see the different categories of substances, and you can see the subsections within those categories. Again, this is not a fully comprehensive what we call a Drugs 101 training. This is just an amuse-bouche for you to continue to go deeper as you're working with your clients and figuring out what are the substances that they're mostly using. But it's everything from stimulants to empathogens, psychedelics to cannabinoids, right? And everything in there. We're going to focus on 2 of these classes today of drugs for the purpose of this session, opioids and stimulants. And again, there's tons of other substances out there. And I think if you go, they update this very frequently, this drugs wheel. So if you go, you can find and download. And if you go, you can actually click on that and it'll give you more information. And so what are we going to cover here? We'll cover depressants, and those are going to be opioids, alcohol, and benzos. And then we'll cover crack cocaine and stimulants and meth, as well as disruptors. We're going to be addressing cannabis use.
Okay, so very quickly, maybe it'd be curious to know what people are that you're working with who access your services, kind of what they're presenting, what drugs of use are they presenting in your places of work? Alcohol, cannabis, heroin, fentanyl, crack, cannabis, nicotine, alcohol, fentanyl, meth, crack, alcohol, fentanyl, alcohol.
Me too.
Yeah. Lots of sort of in local schools, top 3 are vaping, marijuana, alcohol, PCP, interesting, marijuana, alcohol, alcohol pot, alcohol, cannabis, K2, yep, right. Just very quickly, because again, we don't have the time, there's been references to like gambling and porn addiction. I think in some ways they certainly act. My understanding is that they're more called process addictions, but they also impact on different parts of the brain the same way drugs do. That from my understanding of when a person develops a gambling addiction, it often starts because they had a big win. And so they're kind of chasing that high from having that big win. So anyway, all right.
And so when we think of depressants and stimulants, which are the 2 categories that we will be addressing here today, depressants impact our parasympathetic nerves. And so when someone is using depressants, particularly, for example, opioids, their pupils will be constricted. It will stimulate saliva flow. It will slow our heart rate. It will constrict our bronchi. That's why it's important for folks to be able to be breathing, right? It stimulates the stomach, the pancreas, intestines, as well as bile release, and it contracts the bladder. When we think of stimulants, they impact our sympathetic nerves. So our pupils will be dilated, right? It will inhibit our saliva flow. That's why when people are using stimulants, we want them to have good oral care because their teeth can get really damaged. That's why there's a lot of really, I'm going to say this with the understanding that it's a really stigmatizing term that has been used. There's something called meth mouth, right? And if you look it up, you'll find that, and it has to do with the fact that there's not enough saliva there, and saliva helps us maintain oral health, right? So giving people gum, giving people things to chew to help stimulate that is really helpful when they're using stimulants. It accelerates our heart rate, right? It dilates the bronchi, and it also stimulates the stomach, the pancreas, intestines. It converts glycogen to glucose. Again, if we're dealing with people here that may have issues with their blood sugar levels, important to keep that in mind. It secretes adrenaline, right? So again, people may be perceived more jumpy or respond to things in a way that feels more sort of like pulling out your pistols out immediately, and inhibits the bladder contraction. So these are just some examples of how both of these drugs, categories of drugs, may have an impact on our bodies, or people's bodies. And also, I think this is really crucial. It's understanding the modes of use. Not only understanding the drug and understanding like what does the drug do, right? That helps us to begin to understand why that person may be using it, right? If a drug is really good for pain relief, now I understand why you may be using it. And I can ask questions that can help me understand that better. The modes of use are also really, really important. Some people may choose to use a substance through a mode because it meets their need or the specific circumstance that they're in, right? So for folks that are using drugs, they can smoke them, right? And that takes about 5 to 7 seconds to kick in. So you feel the effect right away. There's no injury to the body. These are some of the benefits, and it's easy to access the materials. You can find things to smoke your drugs fairly easily. Some of the risks are that it's harder to hide, right? If I'm smoking, people may see me and the smoke is there, and it can create issues with the lungs, right? So if someone already has issues with the lungs, this may be compromising them further. If you inject your drugs, it takes about 10 to 20 seconds if you're doing an IV injection. Some of the benefits is a very efficient use of the drugs, and the rush is the largest. It lasts a lot. It gives you the most strong effect. Some of the risks is very highly stigmatized. We heard some people in the chat saying, injection drug use, right? Like it's one of the things that is highly stigmatized and can cause injuries, right? We know injuries not only about, we can have collapsed veins, we can have issues with soft tissue problems, we can have abscesses, etc. That can impact, for example, collapsed veins, impact circulation, that can have other complications. And also, it exposes us to the risk of blood-borne diseases, HIV and hepatitis C, the three things that create a syndemic. Also, snorting, it takes about 3 to 5 minutes when you snort your drugs. It's more socially accepted. It gives you a good rush. Some of the risks causes damage to your nostrils. There's a lot of collapsed, ¿cómo se dice? Tabique, your septums, deviated septums or collapsed. Oh my God, bridges of your nose. Is that the correct word? I'm sorry, I can't think of the anatomy in English. And it is harder to hide when you're snorting. And then there are 2 other modes of use, the septum, thank you. There's booty bumping. And booty bumping is nothing else but administering your substance rectally. It takes about 3 to 5 minutes. It causes no injury to your body, and it can be, a lot of people enjoy it during sex. It can be done for foreplay. Some of the risks are that it can dry out your anal or vaginal cavities, and that can lead to increased STD risk. So if we know of a client that loves to booty bump and has fun doing it, we can help them be safer by providing them also information around what are some of the tools and materials that they can use to make sure that they're not exposing themselves to an STD. And then finally, eating or your substances of taking them orally, and that's the one that takes the longest, which is also something to keep in mind, right? Because if I take my substances orally and then I use other substances, I may be putting myself in a position of harm, right? Because I don't know how this thing that I ate is going to kick in. And this other substance may magnify that effect. And so important to think that, many people choose to eat their substances because they're easy to hide and it's socially acceptable and it's less risky. And again, the risks is slower to kick in, and you lose a lot of drug during the ingestion because it has to go through what? Through our digestive system to get broken down. And so a lot of that stuff gets lost there too. And now I'm going to pass it to Joe.
Tanagra, can
Yes.
you go back to that? So again, and I think Tanagra sort of made reference to it, but looking at the snorting and eating orally and how they're more socially acceptable. And when we think about working with clients that they may be reluctant because of the stigma of some of these other modes of use to share how they've used the drug. And so just to kind of keep that in mind. Thank you, Tanagra.
Of course.
So depressants. Why would a person use a depressant? So I think oftentimes, clearly you want to ask the person, right? What is it about this particular drug? What is it? How has it benefited you? And maybe not benefiting you anymore, but how has it benefited you? And so asking that question, a lot of times it has to do with sort of pain management and also kind of numbing oneself from emotional pain that they may be experiencing. So when we think if we go to the next slide, Tanagra, so they usually reduce your level of depressants, usually reduce your level of alertness, brain activity, and general body functions. So, and the other thing to keep in mind is a lot of these drugs are sort of combined with other drugs. And so alcohol with cocaine, for instance, or alcohol with benzos, and obviously that's going to increase people's risk.
Thank you, Joe. And so when we think of opioids, their medical purpose is pain management, right? So this is good information for us to have, particularly when we're working with a client or a patient that tells us, I use opioids, right? So we have a key there of things that we might want to explore. There are different kinds of opioids, from prescription pills all the way to medication-assisted treatment or medication for opioid use disorder. In between that, you have heroin and fentanyl. Fentanyl has been fairly considering fairly new to the scene, right? In terms of the substance use scene, because we've seen fentanyl be used in hospitals, for pain management for decades, right? What we need to know is that people will choose to use these drugs based on many things that you said earlier. Accessibility, what the drug market is dictating, right? As well, we know now that in the, for example, in the East Coast, what you find is 100% fentanyl. It's very, very hard to find heroin in the East Coast because the drug market, has shifted to that. If you go to the West Coast, you can find fentanyl and you can find black tar heroin. Black tar heroin is different to the heroin you would find in the East Coast, which was powder heroin, right? So again, different kinds of heroin, different processes for routes of administration, different potencies, different levels of purity. Again, a person may choose to use heroin. It's not available. They may choose to use fentanyl. There are many, many folks that are using fentanyl, and they're aware that they're using fentanyl. It is a choice. It is cheaper. It is more affordable to them. The high lasts longer to them, is stronger. And so it makes sense for them to use it, and they can use it safely, right? There's a discourse out there that fentanyl is evil, and hence that falls into the fact that people who use fentanyl are evil and we need to punish them. And that's a really horrible, really dangerous narrative to have. Fentanyl, like any other drug, can be used safely as long as the person knows and is aware that they're choosing to use fentanyl, right? And if that's the case, they can do so safely. We know many people who use it safely. We know many people who actually smoke it, and they have found a way of even using it in a more safer way. So again, here you have this information about these different categories of opioids for you to explore. We're not going to go into them right now. We just wanted to name that there are plenty of categories of opioids here that your participants may use. And we want to be curious about why they're using it, right? Why is it that someone is choosing to use these substances, particularly thinking about medication for assisted treatment or medication for opioid use disorder, which has been life-changing for many, many folks. And we also know that if they're in the process of recovery, there are certain spaces where they will not accept someone who's using medications for opioid use disorder because they consider them to be inactive use, and that can be really harmful. Many folks in NA will say that that use consists of substance use. It's not a medication. It is a medication. And so you may have clients that are struggling with that. How do I find community in recovery when I'm being told that I'm still active in use? And that has led people to stop accessing that medication and has sent them back into a spiral of chaotic use, which has not been good for them. It's not been safer. And so when we think here, just an image of different doses of heroin, fentanyl, and carfentanil, this is just important to know that, again, when people are using drugs, having the ability to know what you're using and to hear from folks how they're using it, it's vital for us to be able to then work with them in terms of supporting them to be safer. It's not the same to use that dose of heroin that if I'm choosing to use fentanyl, right? If I don't know what I'm using is fentanyl, that can lead to an overdose, right? So important, this is not to ¿cómo se dice eso? How do you say fear-mongering? Mongering fear?
Fear-mongering. Yes.
Yes, this is just about giving people concrete information that they can take in and they can use. Carfentanil is just a much more powerful version of fentanyl that was developed, Deborah, and that's the difference. It's just that it's much more powerful and potent, and so a smaller amount can potentially be more dangerous, right, than amount of fentanyl. And a way that you can help people to know if their substances have fentanyl in them or not is by using fentanyl test strips. And so you can use these test strips. They are widely available at harm reduction programs. You can also buy them online. There are many providers. BTNX is the one that people have been using for forever. And here it explains to you how to use them. These are harm reduction tools for people that are not trying to use fentanyl, right? So if I want to make sure there's no fentanyl in my substances, I may choose to use these testing strips. And it will give you a pretty accurate reading in terms of whether or not those substances you're using are fentanyl or have fentanyl listed or not. Can you overdose from touching fentanyl? No, you cannot overdose by touching fentanyl. That is scientifically impossible. There are no verified cases of that happening. The first responders that have allegedly overdosed did not actually overdose at all. They had panic attacks. It is similar to what we saw back in the 80s with the HIV epidemic and the panic around HIV, right? I touched someone immediately, I got like exposed to HIV, which we know is not true. Kissing, hugging, touching, none of that stuff will make you contract HIV. And so this narrative that fentanyl is so dangerous that you can't touch it, again, just perpetuates more harms to people who use drugs and choose to use fentanyl, and just creates more space for unnecessary products to be in the market and for us to be using money that should be going to harm reduction programs to support the purchase of that equipment. That makes no sense, and it's unnecessary completely. Yes, Lois, people who use drugs are really, really smart. And what they did was, you know what? We want to use and repurpose these testing strips that are used for urine. We're going to figure out how to use them to help us test our drugs, because drug checking was not widely available at the time. And they took them and repurposed them and showed each other how to use them. So absolutely, yeah. And why would people use fentanyl intentionally? I mentioned this earlier. Many people will use this drug for any other reasons. We use drugs. As harm reductionists, we support people's choices, and we always want to provide them with safer ways to use. Most of the overdoses that we have seen occur with fentanyl are because people did not know, were not aware that they were using fentanyl. And when fentanyl is in the drug supply, most bodies will become wired also to needing fentanyl. So now what we're seeing is people choosing or wanting to use fentanyl that transition from using other opioids, right? Because that's what the drug supply, the drug market is providing them. Is this still me? I think it's still me, right,
Yes.
Joe? Yeah.
Yes.
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 Yes. So what happens when we see a human being that is really high on opioids? Signs of a severe intoxication. Remember, really high does not equal overdose. Someone who's really high on opioids, their heart and respiratory system and general bodily functions will slow down. So you'll see a lot of slurring. There's the nod. I don't know if you've seen the nod off when people are standing up and they nod down and they come back up again, right? Like that very heavy nodding. People will have very slow movement. I remember having a participant that used to come to the dropping center, and she was almost like a ballerina in her movements. Like she was so slow moving, almost moved like she was dancing. It was a beautiful thing to watch, and also like very slow moving. And there can be vomiting, right? So what can we do if we have someone who's extremely high? We want to put that person on their side, on the ground in the recovery position. So if that they vomit, they don't choke on it. And we want to make sure that we keep an eye on that. Keep an eye on their breathing to make sure they're not falling into an overdose. A lot of the folks that came to our drop-in center, that's what we did. We just kept an eye on them, making sure that, hey, are you okay? Hey, Dawn, can you hear me? If you can hear me, go like this. I can hear you. Okay, you're there. I don't see any other signs. I'm just going to let you sit here and get through that process. Make sure that you're safe. What are the signs of an opioid overdose, right? And this is when someone is actually could be in a compromised position. Signs of an overdose are someone who's unresponsive to pain or to verbal stimulation. So Dawn, one of our participants, I would call her name, Dawn would not respond. I would go touch Dawn would not respond to my touch. I could do a sternum rub. I don't know if you've ever done that, but if you do, grab your fingers, put them like this, and rub your sternum kind of hard. It's uncomfortable. I'm doing it right now, and I'm not doing it even hard, and it's kind of uncomfortable. That's the purpose. You can also rub under the nose. You want to verbally stimulate them and physically stimulate them, so that you know that they're awake. If they don't respond to that, that is a sign. People are extremely drowsy. Their pupils are really, really tiny. Their breathing is really, really slow, or there's no breathing. There's also something, if you hear it, you will know it, which is like a gurgling, snoring, choking sound. If you hear it, trust you me, you will know. And you can look at people's skin. If it's ashy gray or pale blue, depending on the person's coloring, around the mouth and the fingertips and the nail beds. My nails are painted, but if the person doesn't have polish, you can see their nail beds. If they're turning bluish or grayish, that is a sign that oxygen is not flowing. And finally, someone's skin is really, really clammy. So things that you can do, and I'm going to get to what you said, Deborah, there, because it's important. You can administer naloxone, which is a medication that will reverse immediately an overdose. You want to call 911 for an ambulance, and you can do rescue breathing, right? Which is here. You can practice rescue breathing, and you can try also doing CPR if that person's heart has stopped. In many communities, particularly those that have overdose prevention sites, which are not many, or safe consumption sites, which are not many in the United States, they're using oxygen right now. Harm reduction programs are getting oxygen canisters, the ones that you use for sports, and they're giving it to participants, and participants have been able to support someone experiencing an overdose and not use naloxone. They have been able to help that person come back with oxygen. That is not to say that naloxone should not be carried and should not be used. We should have all the options, right? Both oxygen and naloxone. The issue with naloxone is sometimes people administer way too much naloxone, and when the person comes back, they're extremely sick. You don't need to give huge amounts of naloxone to bring someone back, because that is really harmful and dangerous to them too. And so we want to make sure that when we give them the naloxone, we administer it, that we are there with them, because they will be sick when they come back and they will want to use again. And that is when it's really, really dangerous.
All right. So I'm also very conscious of the time remaining. So we're going to, I think Tanagra and I were so enthusiastic of getting this information to you. So we're going to go, we're going to really speed it up so we can at least leave a few minutes for questions. I don't think there's much. I think people are aware. I do want to say one thing. Alcohol is a dangerous drug, even though it's legal. By far, it causes the most death and injuries annually than any other drug. If we think about accidents, if we think about medical issues, all of those sort of things, it's a very dangerous drug. One thing to point out is the non-beverage alcohol, like mouthwash, perfume, a hand sanitizer. What oftentimes people will use these because of access, and they tend to be cheaper, and B, it could be also hiding it. Kitty Dukakis, who struggled with addiction, would use mouthwash. And I think one of the reasons she used mouthwash was she had ready access to it, and it was a way to keep things hidden. And then there's the benzos. So very interesting, very quick thing. Guess who got Valium going strategy in terms of marketing? Arthur Sackler was the person that promoted Valium back in the 60s, causing the term mother's little helper, and it was often prescribed to women. And that's something to keep. Very similar to benzos are very similar to how alcohol affects the brain and how it impacts on you. Very good for anti-anxiety. but obviously it comes with its problems. And then certainly if you're mixing alcohol and benzos, it can really increase. So when we think about educating people, this is something that you want to pay attention to.
So if you see someone
Yeah.
who's really high on non-opioid depressants, here are the severe signs of intoxication, very similar to the signs of intoxication for someone really high on opioids. And again, what we want to do is put that person in the recovery position and make sure that we keep an eye on their breathing to make sure they're not falling into an overdose. And you can use oxygen to help them breathe. In this case, naloxone won't be helpful because you don't have an opioid in your system, as Joe was saying. So the response will be to have oxygen available to help them with their breathing. Signs of an overdose on non-opioid depressants is lower body temperature, very low body temperature, and a slower labored breathing again, like having a really hard time breathing. You may want to administer naloxone. The reason for this is since we don't know what it's in the drug supply, it may be that that person is using a pill they thought was a benzo and it ends up being like a pressed pill for fentanyl, for example. And so if that's the case, you want to administer naloxone. If you administer naloxone and the person is not using opioids, nothing will happen to them. And nothing bad will happen. It won't have an effect, right? You do want to call 911. You do want to do the rescue breathing, and you want to do CPR as well as you know it. The same things as you would do when you're responding to an opioid overdose. And I don't think we're able to show this video, but this is just a lovely video from our friends in New Zealand that shows you how to put someone in the recovery position in case you haven't been able to and what to do. So you'll have access to the slides and you'll be able to see that. And now Joe is going to walk us through stimulants.
So actually, Tanaga, I'm going to make a,
Yes.
I hope it's executive
An executive decision. Yes.
So, because I think it would, again, this information is out there. I think for you to cover some general harm reduction guidelines, I think in the
Yes.
time remaining would really be important. So I hope
Yes.
that's okay. Yeah.
That's perfect. I love an executive decision.
Okay.
I love that. So some general harm reduction tips, right? And these apply to everything that we do when we're working with folks that are using drugs. Share with people that it's really important to try as much as they can not to use alone. And if you have to use alone, make sure that you always carry naloxone. You don't know if your drugs have been mixed with that. And if you're not someone who uses opioids and happen to ingest them, can put you at risk of an overdose. So have naloxone available for opiates, visible, to make sure that someone comes in, they can use it on you. Have a phone and let someone know what is up with you, right? Like let someone know, a neighbor, somebody trusted, a neighbor, a friend. We're going to share with you when we share with you the resources. There are several phone lines that people can call when they're alone that will allow them to use with the support of an operator. Never use alone. Thank you, Felice. We're going to share that one. And Massachusetts has a line too. So we're going to share those. We want to make sure that people are going slow. Go slow. You can always add more, but you can't take out. And use one drug at a time. This will help you gauge how it will affect you before taking another one. And start with smaller amounts. I had a friend who ate one cookie, like it was a cookie with a pot that she had bought at a store, and it didn't do anything. And she had 2 more, and then she was having a really bad trip for about 8 hours because she didn't wait until she felt that she's like, oh, it's not doing anything. I'm going to have another one. I'm going to have another one, right? So make sure that you go slow and use one drug at a time. As Joe was saying, polysubstance use can potentially be, not safe for people. We want to make decisions about what, how much, and how you want to use before you enter certain situations, right? This is set and setting, particularly the setting. If I'm going to a place where I'm going to be new and I am shy and I'm going to feel uncomfortable, I know for myself, I'm going to use more. That happens to me when I'm in social situations with alcohol. So I want to make a decision. I'm going to a bar. I'm going to meet up with people that I don't know. I get uncomfortable. I'm shy. Maybe this is a time to drink water. Not the time to have a cocktail. Eating meals, drinking water, getting enough sleep are huge pieces, that can help people avoid an overdose. Make sure that, again, people are using one drug at a time. And Joseph says something really smart that I want to highlight here. Withdrawal from benzos and alcohol can kill you. You want to see a doctor for immediate medication for withdrawal, to have somebody accompany you in that process. I will share that, Cheryl, both the lines, the never use alone and safe spot. I'm going to share them in a second. So,
So,
if folks, go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead. Oh,
No, you go.
so very quickly, because people did identify cannabis as being a very significant. Three things I would just say about that, and I think people are probably aware, it's increased potency. The cannabis, the marijuana out there is not your grandparents' marijuana. The level of THC has grown exponentially. Second thing, and I think Tanagra sort of mentioned this, edibles are going to be slower acting. So there has been actually an increase in people going to the ER for those, like they take a little dose and they say, oh, I'm not feeling anything. So then they take more and then they get hit. And oftentimes they end up in the ER. And then the third issue, and there's some back and forth about this, about tolerance around marijuana. There's been some discussion, you can't build a tolerance, although just from my own experience in working with people will talk about building a tolerance to marijuana. So just wanted to say that. And so for our last question here, how is this information that we provided today, any way it can inform your approach when working with individuals who use drugs? Empathy and increased knowledge will help in intervention. Yes. Prioritize safer use versus other things. Yes. It gives them autonomy to make their own decisions. Focus on taking it slow, to ask, right? Safety, increasing knowledge will help support intervention, increase safety. Yes. I'm curious to learn more about the brain science when it comes to addiction. Yes, yes. Provided with some new info and great reminder. Focus on person-centered. Oh, it's great. I think both Tanagra and I think you're taking away that's great. Increased my own knowledge and gave me a good reference for additional curiosity and questions. Being aware of telling people not to use alone. Yes, increased knowledge. So how to respond to overdoses that are not from opioids. Good basic overview. Power of choice remains with client. Yes. So maybe Tanagra, you can talk about these resources.
Yes, so we have here for you some general resources for you to learn more and also to share with your participants in case that they don't know them. If you want to learn more about drugs, Dance Safe Erowid. Erowid is like the Reddit for drugs. And there are great, great resources within Erowid of people that use drugs that can talk to other people who use drugs. The Drugs Wheel is a fantastic tool that you can share with your participants and you can use to learn more information on drug mixing. You can go to Choose Your Trip. The drug interaction chart is fantastic. It will tell you, it will show you, and Blender Guide. Those are all good tools for folks that are using polysubstance, right? To help them figure out how to do that safer. Any general information, both Next Distro, which is a harm reduction program that sends supplies through the mail for folks, just equipment, naloxone strips, etc., and National Harm Reduction Coalition. And then information on the drug supply, there's drugs data and fentanyl, which are there. You can also join Remedy Alliance for the People. They also share like a monthly sort of digest of what we're seeing. And then the two lines that you can share with people, one of them is Never Use Alone, and the other one is Safe Spot. Those are both great tools for people that may don't have people to accompany them in the process, and it can help them stay safe. You don't have to be using opioids. It can be any substance. If something happens, they will call somewhere for you, whether it's someone you've given them the name and the information to call that you trust, and or call the 911 for you. So these are just great general resources. And then here we want to share with you also some books, some great information for us to continue to deepen our knowledge to better serve our participants. And these are great books that Joe and I kind of chose for this session because we feel that they are particularly important for those of us that are interested in continuing to do this work. And I think that's it. I'm going to stop sharing, if that's okay.
Right, and we may have time for one or two questions.